What's up, it's EricTube101 here, and in today's video, we are going to be covering the second night of the Democratic debates. Now, first off, a kind of big change within my coverage, at least, of the two nights, is that I felt like the first night was more interesting in general, and also in the first night, I had 3 winners and 3 losers. Now, tonight, for the second night, I don't think that it was necessarily that general, and I think it narrowed down to only 1 winner and 2 losers. I would say that the winner was clearly Kamala Harris, just compared to where she was in the polls and to how good she did. And I felt the losers were Marianne Williamson and Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang didn't necessarily do that bad, but for where he is in the polls around 6th and 7th, he only was asked a good 3 questions, and I felt like he should have interrupted more. He should have had spoken up more when it was necessary, but he remained silent throughout the entire 2 hours, except for when he was directly asked questions, and that's why I think Andrew Yang was a loser of tonight, because he promised his fan base that he was going to go in strong and that he was going to do good at this debate if his fan base got him to the debates. But I don't think he did that. I really don't think he did that. So that's why I put Andrew Yang as a loser of tonight's debate. Marianne Williamson, she just really didn't speak with that much clarity, and I didn't enjoy many of her answers. But without further ado, we are going to be going into a question by question, answer by answer type coverage to the second night of the Democratic debate. So the first statement from Bernie Sanders says free healthcare will force all Americans to pay more taxes. Now, he originally tried to avoid this question. He said that the 1% would pay more taxes and that it would be cheaper overall. But then they went back to the specific question that they asked the first time: will the middle class have to pay more taxes? And then he said yes. So healthcare won't get that much cheaper. And again, socialized healthcare, coming from me at least, is not a good idea. I think private insurance is a pretty good idea if we put heavy restrictions on the insurance companies, because right now it feels like we're either going to let them go completely free or we're going to completely ban them. I think the really answer to that is put restrictions on the companies so where they can't overcharge families and not give them the coverage that they need. We need a better insurance policy. Kamala Harris says America doesn't work for the working man and we need to change the tax code. So I really like that quote, America doesn't work for the working man. Basically saying that the lower income people and the middle class is hurting in America's current tax plan, which I feel like a lot of people would agree with that. I think that was a big boost for Kamala Harris. I think that was a great start to her night. Bernie Sanders calls Trump a phony and fraud, another orange man bad type attempt. We've seen a lot of this from Bernie Sanders: orange man bad, orange man bad, orange man bad, 1% bad, 1% bad, 1% bad. Just like we talked about Elizabeth Warren earlier today. Well, yesterday actually, because it's going up after midnight. Sorry that with the time I'm recording this versus the time it's going up is a little bit confusing to try to word exactly the timings. But yeah, the orange man bad and the 1% bad, it's so annoying how often Democrats repeat this. And I feel like most moderate Democrats don't want this. Only the far progressive Democrats want to hear the orange man bad stuff 10,000 times throughout a debate. So moving on, Kirsten Gillibrand says that we don't need socialism, but we also don't need greed-based capitalism. We need human-centered capitalism. So first of all, I want to say that Kirsten did pretty good. Christian Gillibrand did pretty good tonight. I don't think she's necessarily as big as a winner as Kamala Harris was, but she was right next to her on the debate stage, and I think she did right next to her in performance-wise. But we don't need socialism, but we don't need greed-based capitalism. We need human-centered capitalism. Something Andrew Yang also talked about. that we need human-centered capitalism. We need capitalism that works for the American people. And I think that was a great statement by her, and I think that boosted her and it was a great start. Michael Bennett says that we need an opt-in option for healthcare so people can stay with their insurance company. Bernie shakes his head and gets mad, but doesn't respond at all. So basically, Michael Bennett was saying, hey, we need an option for the people on private insurance that they need to be able to opt in or out of private insurance or into Medicare. And I kind of agree with this. I think, like I said, if private insurance is working for some people, I don't understand why we need to force them off. Pete Buttigieg speaks in Spanish in intro, but gives answer in English. So he introduced himself in Spanish and then later on answered in English. You saw this with Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke as well, where they answered some in Spanish, some in English. And every single Spanish speaker basically said that all three of these people spoke very poor Spanish, which is very cringeworthy. Especially Cory Booker was getting blasted for it. Beto O'Rourke was getting blasted for it. We don't know the full impact of Pete Buttigieg speaking Spanish. He didn't do it that much. It wasn't as bad as Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke, but he still did it. Which I think is a really weird attempt to get the Latino vote. So Eric Swallow takes a stab at Joe Biden, saying that he said decades ago it's time to pass the throne down to the next generation, yet he remained in office. I think the basic point of this was pretty good, that we need to pass the throne down, most likely. But here's the thing. A lot of middle-aged people in America today don't want the throne. So basically the throne has to go from baby boomers all the way down to younger millennials and Generation Z, because Generation X was a generation that left policies on the table for decades. I mean, the border was on the table for decades. Climate control's been talking about decades. And, gun control's been basically the exact same things have been being brought up ever since Columbine back 20 years ago. So, I think the torch really can't be passed down because most of the strong politicians are really old in age. When you look at the president and when you look at both the frontrunners in the Democratic Party, of course you do have some really great middle-aged candidates. Not candidates, but politicians such as Ted Cruz. Kamala Harris breaks up other politicians arguing, saying America doesn't want to witness a food fight. They want to see how they're going to put how we're going to put food on their table. And I think this was another great boost for Kamala Harris, because we don't want to see a food fight. We don't want to see all that chitter chatter, We want to see actual policies and how they're actually going to do stuff. So I totally agreed with that quote. Goes on to say that Trump is worrying about stocks and unemployment, but we should worry about having Americans only work one job. So basically, Americans shouldn't be forced to work 2 or 3 jobs. One job should put food on the table. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that minimum wage wise. I don't think minimum wage should pay the bills. I think minimum wage should be for minors, college students, and the elderly who's already retired but still wants something to keep them going. But other than that, I don't think people should be able to survive off of just a minimum wage. Pete Buttigieg says politicians who talk about free healthcare need to talk about how they're going to get to point A to point B, which is a great point because a lot of times they talk about how to pay for it, taxing the 1%, whatever, but they don't talk about how they're actually going to convince Americans to go from point A to point B and why the healthcare system is better. So I thought that was an okay statement by Pete. Bernie Sanders basically restates his same lines, and a lot of lines that's been repeated throughout Democrats in 2016, 2018, and 2020, that healthcare is a human right, and I think everybody agrees with that, but it isn't something for businesses to profit off of. But here's the thing, in a capitalist economy, people are inspired by money. So I think without the money, without giving these scientists money, they're not going to be inspired. But yeah, so healthcare is a human right. whatever. That's such a basic talking point from the Democratic Party. But Maureen Williamson says we don't have health care, we have sickness care. Basically what she meant by this is that we wait for people to get sick, and then we take care of them, we short-term treat them, and then we force them to pay a large bill. But we don't look into the chemicals being put into our air. We don't look into the chemicals being put into our water or our food. We don't look into why Americans get sick in the first place. All we care about is treating the basic problem of the sickness. So again, I think this was a great quote from Maureen Williamson. I think it was probably the best point of her night. So Pete Buttigieg says Washington needs a reform if they can't give the American people what they want, such as immigration. So basically, what he was saying is that every American basically wants a path to citizenship, but yet Washington can't give Americans that. And if Washington can't give Americans what a vast majority of Americans want, then Washington needs a reform with a bipartisan issue and such, and other things like that. And I thought this was a great point by Pete Buttigieg. You know, I think Pete Buttigieg might be another winner of tonight, along with Kamala Harris. I think it was a big winner. Joe Biden stopped mid-sentence and asked, "Oh, is my time is up?" And then stopped talking, and then it went to break. Now, no other candidate just stops talking once their time is up. Basically, the timer will be like, you know, your time is up. And then they'll say a few more sentences. Oh, I need healthcare because of this and this and that. And then they'll stop talking once they're actually done talking. Joe Biden will be like, yeah, so I think we need health. Oh, my time is up. And then just stops talking. And he was the only candidate that's done that, and I think that's a complete beta move. If you can't even handle a debate, if you can't handle a timer, and if you're totally cucking out to those type of things, how are you going to handle Russia? How are you going to handle ISIS? How are you going to handle Iran? How are you going to handle dictators in North Korea? If you can't handle an alarm, how are you going to handle those things when you're the president of the United States and all those people tell you to shut up? If you can't over talk an alarm, how are you going to be the bigger man in the room with dictators, with Vladimir Putin, etc.? Another great move by Pete Buttigieg, saying that Republicans claim to be Christian, but how do you think that God is smiling at kids being ripped away from their parents and thrown into cages by federal agents? And I think that it was a great point that God wouldn't smile at that, and that calling people's face into question in this circumstance is probably a pretty good political move put on by Pete Buttigieg. Of course, some people will say that he's gay, but I think God loves everybody, period. I don't think God has a religious agenda, no matter what religion you support. I don't think your God hates minorities, most likely. So I think this was a great move by Pete Buttigieg. Kamala Harris makes a statement that illegals shouldn't be scared to go to police in public in cases if they're like raped or anything else. I think that's true because when you go to police, a lot of times when you're an illegal, you can't go to police, and I think that creates a lot of problems for a lot of people, which is why we need legal immigration. We need a strong border so there isn't instances where illegals can't get help because of other illegals are attacking them, doing harmful things to them. We can't track down those people, and those people can't come to our police if they need us, because then they'll get deported. So it creates victimhood, and then we can't track the suspects in these cases. And that, Kamala Harris, is why we need legal immigration, to where we have documents on people, we know how to track them, they can come to the police, etc., etc., etc. And I think you just stated perfectly why we need a strong border, Kamala. Pete Buttigieg gives an emotional speech on police brutality, says no politician's words can bring back victims of police brutality and police-involved shootings. Now, if you guys don't know, there was recently a police-involved shooting in Indiana, and he gave a super emotional speech to where he was talking to the mother and everything. And I feel like everybody watching it almost teared up watching it. It was super emotional. I think it was real. And I think the speech that he gave on police brutality during this moment was a great speech. If you watched it, you would probably agree. I think it was super emotional. It got to a lot of Americans. And yeah, I think he did great touching on police brutality in general. But yeah, that's another place where Pete Buttigieg did great, was talking about police brutality. So Kamala Harris and Joe Biden around this time get into it about Joe Biden's background on civil rights. Kamala Harris basically says, well, you didn't support busing and you're a racist. First of all, Joe Biden was just the vice president to a black president. Our first black president, Joe Biden, was the vice president. So I think that kind of throws the racist thing out the window. But the whole busing thing, I think was okay to, question him on. But she just kept on going on and going on and going on with the I'm black, why do you white man hate blacks, Joe Biden racist, vote for black woman. And I don't think I liked that move too much. I think if she just simply asked Joe Biden about the busing issue without mentioning anything else and moved on right when he answered the question, it would have been so much more powerful. But since she kept going, a fight was initiated. I think Joe Biden won, defending his history. And then also Joe Biden around this time mentions working with Mitch McConnell and raising taxes on the 1%. Now this was huge win for Joe Biden. I think, personally, I believe that this was Joe Biden's biggest win of the night, when he said that he's personally worked with Mitch McConnell to raise taxes on the 1%. Now, every other of the 19 candidates that were on the debates at least one time mentioned how awful Mitch McConnell was and how they can't work with Mitch McConnell. Joe Biden said that he did work with Mitch McConnell, says that he can work with Republicans to get his agenda pushed and to get policies pushed and put into place. And so the fact that he worked with Mitch to raise taxes on the 1%, a Democratic agenda, was absolutely amazing, and I'm glad he mentioned that. Because every other 19 candidates were saying, oh, I can't work with Mitch McConnell, I can't work with the Republicans, if we have a Republican Congress, I will get nothing done as president. Joe Biden says, I will get stuff done as president, even if the Congress is red. I've done it in the past with Obama. If you guys remember, we had a pretty much Republican Congress throughout the entirety of Obama's administration, and Joe Biden actually did work with Republicans a lot, and you gotta applaud him for that. So I think that was great that Joe Biden mentioned that. A huge win for Joe Biden there. Christian Gillibrand has, I think, the second biggest moment of her night when she mentions clean elections, basically taking the super PACs and the donations and the businesses out, and, quote, giving the Parkland kids as much power as the NRA. Now, this was done a lot throughout the 2 nights of debates. People standing on the graves of dead children, saying Parkland this, Parkland that, Santa Fe, whatever. I think standing on the graves of dead children is so overplayed, unfortunately, and it's so awful. People did it with Columbine, Sandy Hook, and now Parkland. Those were the main 3 instances where it happened. You saw it first with Columbine back in 1999, where this horrible event happened, and then Democrats stood on the graves of those children to say that we need to pass gun regulations. So I think the point would have been much better if she didn't say NRA versus Parkland kids. But yeah, so I think the clean elections idea is great. If we can somehow take businesses out of elections and make it illegal for businesses to donate to singular politicians and just have elections totally be single donations via regular people, I think that would be great. But I don't think that could ever be done, and I truly believe that it was an empty promise. But I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. Gillibrand mentions women's rights are under assault and 30 states are pro-life. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that there are women living in those 30 states. Not all women are pro-choice. Some women are pro-life. Actually, about half of women are pro-life. Otherwise, there would be no way to have these pro-life laws. If you look at in Alabama, it was a woman that passed pro-life. Democrats have passed pro-life because abortion is wrong. Every citizen in the United States has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of moral happiness. Now, killing babies is not a women's right, and it's not a human's right. You have so many birth control options to you. You have condoms, vasectomies, anything else. Female birth control is obviously available. I'm not as exactly educated on female birth control types. You could probably ask a female on birth control other than a male making a YouTube video, but yeah, I just think that it was stupid that she mentioned that 30 states are pro-life, because that means that her agenda is less popular. Because if the majority of states are trying to pass pro-life bills, that means that the majority of the United States citizens is pro-life, including women. Because women do live in those pro-life states, and a lot of them enjoy the bills being passed, including Alabama's governor, who is a woman. Pete Buttigieg says local mayors and royal people can play a huge part in the solution to the climate crisis by growing crops and using the right types of soils. And I think this was a brilliant move by Pete, just to try to win over the rural areas, at least some votes, at least some districts. And I think that was probably a good idea by Pete, saying that he thinks that royal people can be the solution. I think it's a cheap shot to win over the red states, but I don't think he actually meant that. But I do think it was a pretty good shot to win over the rural area. I gotta give that to him. Joe Biden mentions that all cars will be electronic by 2030, and he'll give $400 million to renewable energy, mentions building solar power, etc. stuff, and plans as vice president, and that every car in America will be electronic by 2030. Now, I think that's unreachable. I think a vast majority of cars will still be gasoline powered by 2030, just because you can't possibly force every single car out of America in 10 years and have completely different cars in 10 years. Because when you're looking at the 2018 through 2019 models, a lot of these cars are still gas powered, so somehow flipping the switch to electric powered cars in 10 years I feel like is very unrealistic. Joe Biden mentions that the first thing he would do as president is defeat Donald Trump. Now, I don't know if he just misunderstood this question, but if you're the president, Joe, that would mean that you've already defeated Donald Trump because you took his spot in the White House. So I'm not quite sure what you meant by you're going to defeat Donald Trump after you become the president and have defeated Donald Trump. I think that's just a confusing part by Joe Biden. I think that was one of the parts where he lost tonight. Andrew Yang says that the universal basic income is his first issue. Anybody who's followed Andrew Yang already knows that. Basically, he wants to give $1,000 a month to every American citizen over the age of 18. And this will go back into the economy in a trickle-up effect. And I think that's a great point made by Andrew Yang, and I think he got that point across pretty well. Bernie Sanders says that the news anchor that fed him a question misrepresented him by quoting him. Now, this was a direct quote that she mentioned from Bernie Sanders, in which he responded that it misrepresented him. Bernie, your quotes cannot misrepresent you. The things you say do represent the person you were at a certain time, and if you said it recently, then it represents the person who you currently are. Kamala Harris says that she will use executive order to force Congress to take action on gun control. So basically what she said is that she wants Congress to decide what to do on gun control, and that she wants a order or a bill on her desk within the first 100 days. And if that doesn't happen, then she'll use executive order. And I think that's a pretty decent thing to say. When you're going to be working with Congress and you're actually going to force Congress to give you bills and force Congress to do their job. I really agreed with Kamala Harris there. I think that was a big win for Kamala. And this is the last thing I have here. Pete Buttigieg says that as a member of the military, there's some guns that don't need to be in Americans' hands in peacetime. And I fully agree with that, because when you're in peacetime, you don't need military-grade weapons. And I feel like most people in the military will probably tell you that. Assault rifles, rocket launchers, and very military-type weapons. And yeah, guys, so that's going to be the end of this coverage. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!